Carlo, my question is, how do we deal with atheists who kind of refuse to draw conclusions based on logic and reason? They continually ask why, or how do you know that, or say we can't know that because we can't see that, or that sort of thing.
Well, I think I would take your last statement. First of all, thanks for the question, Andrew. If the atheist would say, well, we can't see that, well, then we're dealing with what is called scientism.
No, we're not. Because scientism is an extreme of logical positivism, which is the idea that only statements verifiable through empirical observation are cognitively meaningful. But it's not being said here that everything needs to be empirically verified, only that God's existence needs to be empirically verified. Because the question is one of existence, mind external, more than merely conceptual existence. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers, BionicDance here. Have you ever noticed how, when a theist says, here's how to evangelize to atheists, it's almost inevitably the worst possible advice they could give? They seem to live in a bubble where the arguments that would totally work on them just can't help but work on everybody else.
I'm sure, Andrew, as you know, and as our listeners know, the worldview of scientism is a self-refuting proposition because there's no scientific experiment that you can conduct in order to prove the truth value of that statement. Namely, the only type of evidence is scientific evidence.
And this is a trick theists seem to love, where they equate two conceptually different things as if they're the same. Because this scientism of his is a philosophical proposition, while God's existence is an empirical question. In other words, one is an idea, while the other allegedly exists beyond the conceptual, as something external to the mind. These are not equivalent, but he's trying to argue that the one has the same problems as the other. This is either dishonest or intellectually naive. You decide.
If the problem is they're not willing to go through the logical arguments, perhaps you could respond to the atheist and say, well, would you accept my claim by just saying, well, God exists without any sort of argumentation? Hopefully they would respond, no, you need to give me some proof for that. Atheists are very fond of putting the burden of proof on us as theists, which I would agree with. We're making a positive claim, God exists, and we need to provide evidence for that.
And this surprises me that he's ready to accept the burden of proof. Most theists don't. But let's see just how long it lasts.
And then third, you could, begin asking him questions and sort of shift the focus and say, well, why don't you believe that God exists?
Well, that didn't take long now, did it? Why don't I believe a God exists? Because you failed your burden of proof, that's why. You made a claim. You didn't back it up with checkable facts, thus I did not accept it. So how about you try again there, Chester?
Trent Horn's fond of saying, he always says, you could ask the atheist, what is the one argument that you think is the best possible argument for God's existence, and what's wrong with it?
What's wrong with that argument is that it doesn't exist. Theists keep looking for this magic bullet bit of reasoning that can logic God into existence that will make an atheist say, golly, I never thought of it like that before. You've opened my eyes. I don't need real-world proof that God exists after all. The thing is, that argument does not exist. What's wrong with your arguments is that they're arguments. I could give you a logical argument that just about anything exists, provided I didn't have to show it to anybody, provided you don't get to check my work. But the proposition that God exists is more than just conceptual. It says that even if every last thinking, perceiving mind in the universe died, God would still exist, that he's not just an idea. And if we're going to accept that proposition, you have to give real-world evidence. That part is non-negotiable. You have no choice. You have to give us a reason to think that God is more than just your imaginary friend.
So those are three ways, perhaps, that you could approach such an atheist. What do you think of that, Andrew?
I think those are good. I never thought about turning around and asking them questions, because usually they respond to me with those things, but if I'm asking them the questions and they can't respond, they have to answer my questions.
There's the key.
That's right.
Can you prove a godless universe? What's your evidence that God doesn't exist?
And this fundamentally misunderstands the position of most atheists. A lot of us aren't even saying that there are no gods, just that we don't believe in any. And that's your fault, because you've said a god is real, but haven't given us good reasons to think you're not full of crap. If you never brought up the possibility of a god, we wouldn't even be thinking about it, much less discussing it. And we still wouldn't be believing in any gods for the exact same reason. Nobody has been able to show one to us. So again, this is the worst possible advice to give for evangelizing to atheists. Do you really think you're going to make us say that a god must exist because we can't prove there isn't one?
And that begins the dialogue. And when they begin to go through those various reasons, you can begin to see the fallacies in the reasoning. You can begin to see where they're going wrong. Maybe they haven't quite defined their terms correctly. They might be misunderstanding, our understanding of God. And they might be rejecting a God that we would reject too, as often happens in dialogue between theists and atheists.
This isn't about the kind of God you believe in. This is about your claim that he's real. If you're going to say that such a creature exists, but we can't detect him with a Geiger counter, X-ray, radar, or even just having a chat over tea and biscuits, well, you sound kind of nutty, and you've gone for a complete cop-out, forcing us to just take your word for it. How did anybody even learn that a God exists in the first place if he's not showing up in empirical ways? Psychic communication? Get actual. Do you believe in horoscopes and palm readers too? Where do you draw the line at people's claims of magic, and why should anybody accept yours? Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please think.
Help.